their consciousness, the essence of who they are, leaves the body that they were in and enters a new body in the new locality that has been immediately created for them. And that person that they have now becomes edited into the memories of everyone around them. So they have always been there, but they are also brand new. The question about what happens to the body that they have vacated is an open one, but that's part of what makes it interesting, because just like you were saying, Edwin, about that spiritual question of like, what is the essence of a person and what happens to you if you're not there anymore, is one of the things that we think about a lot.
This is the future.
Hello and welcome to the Alternate Futures podcast, where we chat with indie sci-fi creators about their work, the world, and anything in between, or beyond. I'm your host, Edwin Rydberg, and today I'm here with Darkly Lem. In this episode, we're going to explore their Transmentation series and dive into all things multiverse. But I have to quickly qualify that this is not the Marvel-style multiverse of zero consequences, rather a deep, rich multiverse of political intrigue and body hopping. But first, Darkly Lem can be thought of as a singular entity with 5 components who write with a unified voice. There are 5 proxies present in the Earth-type locality in the central cluster, known as Josh Year, Craig Lincoln, Ben Murphy, Cadwell Turnbull, and Darusha Wame, live with their 5 kids, several spouses, and a modest menagerie, where they are at work on many world novels. Hi, Darkly Lem. Thanks for joining me today.
Thanks for
having us.
So the bio makes you sound kind of like a writing cult living in a commune, to be honest. Now, I assume that's not true because you're joining me from different parts of the world. If you can confirm that, because I'm curious.
We're a diasporic cult, so,
okay. There you go. So in the Amazon bio, which I've got most of my information of you from, you suggest envisioning you as 5 authors in an impeccably tailored trench coat. First of all, I guess I'm curious who came up with that description. And for myself, strangely, when I think of the 5 entities of Darkly Lem, I kind of have this shadowy, like fuzzy shadow creature in my head with sort of 5 minds guiding it. So I don't know why, but maybe it's because of a children's book I'm working on. But that's sort of how I envision you guys. So I guess curious, who came up with the trench coat idea?
Darkly Lem. Darkly Lem did.
It, yeah.
Darkly Lem. So all of you.
We spitballed the bio quite a bit as a part of our writing process. Sometimes is just getting together in video chat and coming up with ideas and things. And the bio came out of one of those processes. So it was indeed a group effort.
It's interesting.
Many of the Darkly Lem things are.
Yeah. It is interesting with the trench coat because we'll get into later on with your hides and coats and proxies. That's sort of linked into there. I don't know if that was intentional, but I did see it that way. As a single entity, how would you describe your character and your identity?
Sometimes we make jokes when we're together, and then we decide that those jokes are what we're going to go with. And the trench coat idea might have come from that. I don't exactly remember.
Yeah, that's fair enough. It does link interestingly to the coat idea, which we'll get into later on as well. And sort of who came up with the Darkly Lem name then? I keep asking who, but maybe all of you together. But how did that arise, shall I ask then?
Yeah, my initial memory tells me that Darkly was something that we first came up with. Is that right?
I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah, these things blend together over time.
I want to say Darusha might have floated it initially, but then it evolved from there into, I thought so, but I don't remember exactly.
I believe we had 2 characters, Darkly and Lem, who were going to appear in the books, and we were going to do a coy metatextual thing where those characters were potentially the authors of the thing that you were reading. But over time, that just sort of faded away when we decided that Darkly Lem would become the actual pseudonym itself. So it was initially, I believe, part of the drafting of the book, but those characters ended up getting nixed in favor of our alternate identity.
Well, they kind of got changed because like the books have this frame around them in the front matter, right? Where there are these archaeological scholars who are writing this treatise, this history, right, of the multiverse. And they are kind of Darkly and Lem, even though their names are sort of different. But you can infer as a reader, or at least I infer as a reader as opposed to one of the writers, that sort of their nicknames are Darkly and Lem or something of that nature. And so like it fits together in that way if you want it to read it that way. But Darkly Lem has written other things as well. And so it's kind of hard to really make sure that they are in fact those characters or not. So unfortunately, I think the entire interview is going to be this way, where one person says one thing, another person says another thing, and they're kind of similar, and they sort of go together, but they mostly don't, because that's the five of us. But Darkly has their own opinion, which is different from each of ours.
So, I mean, each of you have your own writing as well, and I guess first I'll start with how did you meet, and then maybe I'll go briefly into each of your writings. But I was wondering, so I'm aware there's a Many Worlds anthology. Is that sort of what brought you together, or did you know each other before that?
Well, four of us met in grad school at NC State, but Cadwell, you could speak a little more to that probably.
Okay. So yeah, me, Josh, Craig, and Ben at some point was at NC State. Some of us crossed over, but we knew each other through that space. And we met online and hit it off, and they joined a group, and then they joined this little writing project we were doing and became a part of Darkly Lem.
So did you guys sort of form the Many Worlds project as a thing to start with, or was it something that evolved after, throughout your writing process, of someone individually, or did it come together, multiple people?
Mm-hmm.
It was initially very much Cadwell's brainchild. Cadwell came up with it, and I recruited the rest of us into the larger Many Worlds project. And it was subsequent to the creation of Many Worlds as a multiversal concept that he asked if anyone would be interested in collaboratively writing a novel. And the four of us who are not Cadwell were interested. So we began that process after Many Worlds had been founded.
I'll just jump in and point out that Many Worlds contains authors who are not Darkly Lem. I think there's like 22 of us now, something in that number. So there are authors who are not part of Darkly or Darkly in the anthology, and we also have a website and podcast of short stories that fit within the Many Worlds shared universe and are written by the breadth of our membership.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that because I saw on your bio, Darusha, that you mentioned the Many Worlds Writing Collective. So that's the broader scope of the 22 people then?
Yeah, okay, that's correct.
How long have each of you been writing for? Because some of you have quite an extensive backlist.
I started writing probably around 16. I lived in a very isolated area. It was a beach town, and the tourism meant that there's like no kids around. So I just wrote on fiction, or tried to, on a computer, and then that carried over into college. I've been on and off kind of doing it since, but I haven't really published anything. The first thing I published, I think, was like 2014, the short story for the Drabblecast, and then publishing a little bit off and on for short stories.
I started as a poet, believe it or not, and I wrote poetry pretty seriously for a while, including like taking high-level courses on that in university and publishing a chapbook and so on and so forth. And then didn't really write very much for a while, but decided to get into fiction sort of later in life. And I was in between jobs and had nothing better to do. So I thought, I'll write a novel. So I did that, and then realized that maybe I should take it. I had an idea for a better novel after that. So I wrote a better one and published that. And my first book came out in 2007. And then I just kind of kept on keeping on.
Wow. I don't think I knew you were a poet before, Darusha.
I know you'd never be able to tell from the writing.
All the secrets come out now.
I think I can tell. I can tell. Yeah, I'll just jump in since I'm talking. I've been writing since middle school, on and off to some degree. Got my undergrad degree in professional writing, got an MFA in creative writing. And so I knew since I was a kid that I wanted to do it. And so I tried my hand at it. Started publishing, I think my first story was in 2017, and I've been publishing short stories and novels since then.
Yeah, I'll go next. I've been, like Cadwell, writing since I was a kid. I went to undergrad and then grad school and got published. I think the first time was in 2010 or 2011, and then mostly short fiction. I actually started in journalism and then made the transition during college because I wanted to write more of things I enjoyed and things that I wanted to write. So I moved away from short fiction more recently, and I'm publishing these books and hopefully other books later.
I guess that means it is my turn to go back to the beginning as well. I likewise was interested in writing very young, but then I realized that I wanted to impress girls, so I played music for a long time instead. And that was what I studied in college. But then after graduation, moving to New York to become a rock star, I realized that maybe it was books that I wanted to create. And so started writing more and then got the MFA at State where I met Craig and Cadwell.
So you guys have been writing for quite a while then. I mean, it sounds like most of you since your childhood, essentially. So I looked through some of your backlists and Cadwell, I was really interested. So you wrote something in an anthology, Black Panther Tales of Wakanda?
Yeah, I did. I wrote a Killmonger story.
So what I'm
Mhm.
curious is there's a lot of take on this, of course, on what's happened to the Marvel Cinematic Universe after the end of Phase 3. I was curious your own take on it because a lot happened in that period with the storytelling changes and continuity issues and things like that. Do you follow the cinematic universe? And if so, do you have any take on that?
I do. I feel like we all might have some takes on. My personal feeling is that I think that what they needed to do after the Infinity War stuff was to go small again and tell more intimate stories. And they decided to launch deeply into their multiversal stuff, which I think they weren't exactly ready for. If I was to do it, no one's asking me, I would have started gradually into the multiversal stuff. But I think that the challenge with stories that are that big, that have so many different characters that are taking place across all this time, is that you eventually hit up against these kind of continuity issues. And because these characters are so big and popular, you want to keep them around. So you end up doing things where you kill them off and you bring them back and you do all kinds of stuff like that, which is why we've leaned more towards the worlds being the things that we return to instead of characters, and the societies being the things that we return to instead of characters, so that we have stakes within the narrative. People will eventually die. And so we definitely thought about that a lot into why we were thinking about what we want to do differently for the series and the Many Worlds project as a whole.
So you could say that the MCU did influence the development of your own multiverse in a way, at least in a way of what not to do, sort of thing.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say that. I think that I've always been interested in multiverse stuff, right? One of my favorite TV shows when I was a little younger was Fringe. It's about multiversal stuff, and, Sliders is a good example of this too. I've always been interested in it as a concept. I think that Marvel has popularized it, even though it's been happening for quite a bit longer in books and TV and etc. But when we were talking about this series, the project, we did think a lot about not going in those directions. How could we do something that would be different than what Marvel is doing for sure?
Right. So one of the things I've heard with the MCU was they had a continuity team throughout most of the first 3 phases of the saga, and then they got rid of them towards the end of the saga, and continuity kind of went by the wayside. So that leads into your own, because well, we won't get fully into your story yet. I want to ask a bit more about your writing process, but you have a multiverse of at least 9,000 worlds, multiple cultures, a lot of characters, a lot of different worlds in there, a lot of different realms. Do you have a massive Bible that you sort of go to? Like, how do you manage all that information?
We do have a massive Bible.
Okay. It's like a sort of Google Docs kind of thing.
Yeah, well, it's actually kind of like a wiki. It's a coda now, right? Like we started it as a Google Doc, and then it became a wiki, and now it's a coda. But
And
yeah, it's
how
pretty expensive. And we go back to it because we forget stuff constantly. So we do have to, go back and check and see what this character in this society would say in any given situation.
It is
actually,
worth noting that we definitely do not have 9,000 fully individuated universes, planned. But at the same time, there are a great many things that we think are very cool and very exciting that have not yet appeared anywhere in public. And I certainly feel a great deal of excitement to get some of those things written and on the page so that other people can enjoy them in the same way that we've enjoyed them, coming up with them, drafting things, brainstorming things.
One of the things that's interesting is that within the Many Worlds project, which extends beyond the Transmentation books, is that all of us can play within the worlds that other people have created. I've written a short story based on a world that Josh created. And, things like that have happened. Ben and I have collaborated on a short story and created a world there that's then appeared briefly in one of the books and stuff. And some of the other writers who are not Darkly Lem can play in the worlds that we individually or as a group have created. And we can also individually or as a group or in different collaborations play within those worlds. So there's we don't have 9,000 worlds yet, but it's not at all outside the realm of possibility that there would be at least references to that many things out there based on all of the very different combinations that we can all do now and in the future.
That's what I was going to say to Ben is you don't have 9,000 worlds yet, do you? But you keep going. You got 22 writers, so eventually you might.
We're
So
getting
all
there.
these short stories go into the Bible as well then?
No, I would say our writing this trilogy has beefed up the Bible considerably. So I think anything that we agree on is canon is something that we would put in the Bible. And some of those things you just encounter as you're writing a story or as you're writing a scene in one of the novels, things pop up and then we discuss them, and whatever turns out in the discussion is what ends up in the Bible.
So do you have very regular meetings? How do you, it would seem you have to almost meet weekly to keep this going.
Yeah, twice weekly. Yeah.
Twice weekly, wow. And is that sort of tied into a writing group sessions as well, or is it all brainstorming?
Right now,
Right.
it's all writing group.
The meetings are basically just whatever needs we need to fill at the time. Sometimes it's like just doing editing. Sometimes it's brainstorming. Sometimes it's administrative stuff that we need to take care of. So it's just whatever we need to work on.
Excellent. So I was curious, why did you decide a multiverse story? This must have probably happened 2020 or maybe earlier.
Yeah, I think the answer really is that that's what Many Worlds was. That's what Cadwell conceived of. That's how we all came together, was this idea that whatever it is that any of us are writing can exist in the same multiverse. And there are characters that we can create that traverse all of our different worlds. And so, anything that any one of us wrote can be a part of this conceit. And so I think that's where it initially comes from.
Yeah, I'll add a little bit to that. I think it came from this desire to make short stories have more value in the marketplace. So like early on, I was thinking about the fact that there's a lot of short story writers and they will write the novel equivalent of words and they just wouldn't have the same value when you put it out into the world. And so the thought was if you could build a multiverse of different people's stories and you could put stories into this multiverse and story worlds into this multiverse and create some kind of connection between them, you could add value to the short stories themselves. People would tune into short stories, but they would also read the novels and the series and the longer stuff that would connect all of these worlds. And so the novels came out of the idea of using the meta narrative, the thing that would connect all of our stories together in some way to add value to all of our short story worlds.
Right. And that's very interesting. Yeah, because I got my publishing start publishing short stories and anthologies back in 2008. I was on a website, writing.com, where I saw, kind of like you were suggesting, a lot of authors writing a lot of really quality short stories. And I published them in several anthologies, but like you say, people just don't buy short story anthologies, do they? And they don't have the same value as a novel does typically. So yeah, that's quite interesting. I'm curious how you say that sort of you build it so it's short stories, but obviously you've written novels now within this. Darkly Lem is writing a series of novels. It's a bit mind-boggling to me. I've done some projects with multiple authors, sort of campfire type stuff, right? And so you go around, each person writes a different chapter, and it usually goes kind of really strangely. And people don't stay very well to the voice of the characters, and then the story goes off in weird directions and everything. So how did you manage with 5 authors to stay on course, I guess? You do meet twice a week, but still, that's got to be an interesting management issue.
Yeah, the short answer is you need at least one I think, to get you really aiming in that direction.
Yeah, I'm the sort of timekeeper, scold, organizational person of the group, and I tend to harass people about time frames and getting things done. But I think Josh hits on a point, which is that we all have different strengths and also different weaknesses. And we have over the years, because we've been at this, we Darkly have been at this for 5-ish years, I think now, something like that. And over those years, we've sort of learned how to harness each other's strengths and, lean on each other to bolster the things that that person is able to put forward, so that when we do come up with something that's a challenge or something that individually is hard for us to do, we can make that go. And that's just time and working together and being really open with each other and meeting twice a week and reading each other's writing constantly and learning each other's voices and all of that kind of stuff. So that's in the writing, but also in the administration work and just being 5 people who are working on a project together and stuff like that. So it is very much a team effort. And so, yeah, that's part of it.
You seem to be the timekeeper and the sort of admin person for managing it. But what about, so I imagine your brainstorming sessions lead to plot development. What processes do you take to stay within each other's voice for the characters? You talked about reading everyone's a lot, but it's still quite easy to get outside of the voice of the character that, let's say, someone else has created. Do you have a lot of feedback in that regard?
Yeah, we do. We have a extensive editorial process. I think that's the biggest thing that allows us to stay on task is we look at each other's work and we add edits to each other's work, right? We suggest things. And so there's a little bit of us, even if I'm writing an individual chapter, there's a little bit of everybody else in that chapter. And we also have experts for certain characters and societies. It just kind of came up organically as we went. Like we have, some really great Oftala characters, and Josh jumps in to add voice to what they sound like in certain instances. And so we lean on each other in that way too. It's just like, does this sound like something this character would say? And though we don't always align on what or on who these characters are, we can come to some kind of consensus agreement on what a character sounds like. And we kind of mess with things until it feels right for everybody, or mostly everybody.
To add on to that, I think the reason the editorial process works for unifying voice and everything is that every one of us does like 2 passes through. When we do a sweep through editing, we all leave comments and then we all review each other's comments and comment on each other's comments. And then we come together and decide on how to address those issues. So that helps really shore up all of the tangents that might occur from people just working on stuff individually.
Do you ever step on each other's toes, like emotionally? Do you ever get heated in your sessions?
Never.
Really
that has
offended? No.
never once occurred.
Of
Never a raised
course.
voice, never a hurt feeling. No, we are 100% in alignment every step of the way.
Lockstep.
We butt heads in sometimes surprising ways. So like we'll butt heads over punctuation sometimes. We have infamous stories that we have in our future memoir that we write of like little spats we've had over things or big spats we've had over like plot or character or something. It usually stays about the work itself though. We tend to get along pretty well.
Yeah, that's important that it doesn't stray to personality, isn't it? That's hard to come back from. I definitely want to read that memoir when it comes out. So how long do you give give yourselves for writing a segment? And then what's the process sort of, let's say each chapter, how long approximately would that take? How much revision would you take on it? So overall, then I'm looking at how long would it take to build a novel, for example?
I mean, sort of the timekeeper type person, but really it's like, how long is a piece of string? It takes what it takes. That's the way writing works, unfortunately. And yet we somehow manage to draft a book in a year. That's the answer to your question.
Yeah.
How we manage to do that is that's just how it goes. Some chapters take a really long time, some don't. Sometimes the editorial process takes a really long time, sometimes it doesn't. But we do have deadlines. I mean, our publisher provides us with deadlines, helpfully, that we sometimes meet and usually come close to. But I mean, those are short answers. It takes us a year to draft a book. That is not including the many years that we did planning things.
Right, the world building.
Yeah.
How do you give each other, each person has a chapter they're supposed to write? So I assume you're not, in this regard, Darkly Lem is not a pantser. I imagine you plot the story out fairly significantly. So do each of you are given a chapter to write and then you bring that together, or how does that work?
Yeah, we've definitely done it different ways for different books. Assignment is the way that we generally do it. And then I think we've tried to keep track of word count and things like that and how much time people are putting into given sections and different characters and plot lines. So yeah, I would say differently for different books, but I think somebody can probably expound on that.
I can try. I know we've evolved the process because the drafting usually goes very quickly since we're just splitting up chapters and writing, but then trying to unify it takes a long time because there's often like, oh wait, this logic breaks because of we need something to happen between here so they know about a thing or whatever, things like that happen. So we've evolved the process to try to make editorial go better, but that's also in turn extended the writing. So like we've had it like I think book one, a lot of people were kind of siloed in storylines, not completely, but most part were like entrenched in like certain stories, and we had to like make those come together better. But then the second book we split up so everybody touched different parts of the story, which took longer because we had to read to be able to write the chapters. But it did, I feel like it made the editorial go by a little bit smoother.
Sometimes we write individual chapters individually, but we have written chapters together. We've had like team ups over the years as well. So sometimes it's a couple of us or a few of us. When we started the project, we did the first couple chapters together in a Google Doc, writing over each other to figure out what the voice would be. Once we set that voice, then we started doing assignments. For the third book, we're trying out this kind of exquisite corpse model. So we have an outline of what the chapter is going to be, but we're all taking our own pass at a particular chapter. Much of it is in the conclusion of the book because we have a lot to do in that area. So yeah, it's mostly assignment, but occasionally we do team ups.
Probably worth mentioning that the short story Blink in the anthology written by Darkly Lem was written completely in that fashion, where we're just composing over each other.
I honestly can't really even imagine how that works, to be honest.
It is
quite interesting.
If I had my way and the world were different, we would write the entire trilogy in that manner because it is the most fun writing that I think I've ever had in my life. It's ridiculous, it's chaotic, it's absolutely unbelievable. But what comes out of it is it's like magic. It's like watching sorcery happen in front of your eyes as you start off with just like a jumble of sentence fragments and like 5 cursors going all over the page. And then sometime later, somehow, you have this piece of prose that's really fascinating and interesting that you had something to do with, and yet is completely new and exciting and different than anything you would have come up with. So, I mean, if we could write all the books that way, that would be my druthers, but we'd be doing it until the year 3000 because it is not a fast process. Either that or we'd have to meet for 8 hours a day every day, which unfortunately time zones and life does not allow.
Yeah, at that point you become a truly unified 5-part mind. All I can imagine is like text going across the screen, then being erased, then new text coming, and then is that more or less what it's like?
Yeah. Or just like 5 options of one thing.
Yeah, because we tried
Yeah,
not to
sometimes
erase
it
each
happens.
other's. So we would just go down to another line and start ours, and it might include half of the sentence above. But we generally try not to erase each other's stuff on the fly.
We sometimes characterize it as improv, like long form improv, just sort of yes-anding other people's lines where, like Josh is saying, someone might write half of a sentence and then there will be a pause as they are pondering the second half of that sentence. Then you write the second half of that sentence, or you write the second half of that sentence and slash and another possibility for the second half of that sentence, and then slash and another possibility for the second half of that sentence. And it's, like Drusha said, kind of chaotic, but also a great deal of fun to sort of extemporaneously produce a whole host of different possibilities for every line, for every sentence, sometimes, 6 possibilities for different words, different descriptors, and then talk through or make marginal comments on those things as we are going. But also, like Drusha says, that is a very time-consuming process, so we have generally limited it to only a few situations, a few chapters per book. The first chapter, the first book, and like Cadwell was saying, some of the concluding chapters of this final book that we're writing.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to get some authors together and try that just to see what it's like. I'm just really curious.
It's really fun. And I can't tell you now, looking at those first couple chapters of the first book, I have no idea who wrote what. It's really just like a merging of all of us. It's really cool.
True Darkly Lem then. So you do have your second book out in this series now, and you have 5 of you in the group. So what's the marketing experience been like? How did you approach your marketing then?
I think we all individually try to support it through our own social media presence. We do have a social media account for Darkly, but I don't think we've figured out exactly how we're going to implement their social media presence yet. But mostly it's been individual efforts or like cross posting with each other. And like we're all in different communities. And I know that I've been boosting stuff in other communities that I'm a part of just for hobbies and stuff like that. So I'm sure that kind of little underground viral marketing happens incidentally through that kind of process.
Has your publisher been very good for this?
I mean, they handle the sort of B2B, I guess is what you'd call it in the business world, but booksellers, they've been to a few like conferences and things like that. And we had, for the first book, we had 2 launch events. I was unwilling to travel to the US for the launch, sadly. There was a launch in North Carolina that 4 of the other Darklies attended in person. I attended virtually. And then the publisher arranged for a launch event here in Wellington, New Zealand that I did. So, which was actually pretty cool. It was a bit of a bummer to be by myself, but it was neat that we were able to have events at different times at different parts of the world that they arranged and things. So they've been good about that, and they've been quite good about making sure that all of us are involved in those conversations. They were also very good about getting advanced reader copies out, which I think they're going to be doing. The second book isn't out quite yet. It's going to be out in March.
Oh, okay.
So
I've seen it on
yeah,
Amazon.
advanced reader copies are probably starting to circulate at this time.
Okay. Has it been well received then? I mean, a multiverse story has baggage with it, as we've discussed earlier. So has the story been quite well received?
Yeah, so far it's been very well received. I can't think of anything that we've seen otherwise.
I mean, because as I mentioned, it is definitely different than the Marvel style, which is good. So
Yeah.
Yeah, we've gotten some favorable reviews from Kirkus and a couple other places, right?
Publishers Weekly.
Yeah, I'd say all the professional reviews, like the trades and stuff that have reviewed it, have given it positive reviews. I think that readers generally find the project dense. There's a lot going on in it. And that's not bad. It's usually like, this is really dense. I love it. But it is a challenging read because we do a lot with the multiverse concept.
yeah, I listened to the audiobook. Probably was a good thing because it's good and bad because it was quite dense. The narrator was quite good, so it flowed very well. But at the same point, I think probably some of it flows past without sort of the same kind of processing that you'd get reading the book in terms of the locales and all that and the world building. I guess that's a good time to actually get onto your book, which is Transmentation Transience. And the second book is, remind me again, Transmentation Transgression.
Right.
And so maybe if I give a brief summary and then you can add in anything that I miss. I would consider it a multiversal space opera filled with political intrigue and personal stakes. I think there's some very interesting and deep world building. And then it kind of kicks off. I don't know. I'm in a sort of World War I, World War II mood, but it kind of kicks off with the inciting incident that brings several cultures together in their start of their clash, and then it moves in from there into the political intrigue, etc. Does that sum up a very much more complex story fairly concisely? Anything else you'd like to add to that?
The original conception that Cadwell pitched to see if we would, to see who would be interested in writing this collaborative novel was sort of like a multiversal spy novel. And the working title for a long time was Cold War novel. That hasn't quite been the direction we've ended up taking, but I think what you've described is a pretty accurate summation of what we're trying to accomplish, that we're interested in the politics and the societies as much as the action itself.
Yeah, so there is some of the spy stuff going on in the background as well. Does that sort of, because I felt that the first book definitely did focus on the political intrigue to a large degree. There are the personal stories in the various realms, and we'll get into some of the sort of, well, world building aspects, I guess. Are you going to build up the sort of spy element of that further in the next one, or does it stay with a lot of the political intrigue as well, given how the book ended, I suppose?
I would say that the spy element of that original novel that we were talking about is still in there. It's in the series for sure.
Right.
And there are intelligence people all throughout the series doing intelligence work, doing spy work. It's just that's not exclusively the focal point. All kinds of other things are the focus of the series as well. But that's still there. We continue that stuff, all of the political intrigue stuff. There's still a lot of council meetings and that sort of thing in the rest of the series.
Yeah, definitely. Excellent. So as we mentioned, it's a multiverse story. You have the Transmundi you call the multiverse. Is that, did I pick that up right?
One of the societies calls it that. So
Okay.
every society has their own way of looking at the multiverse, their own language for it, their own terminology for it, and their own way of understanding it. And so we've tried very hard to keep the terms appropriate to the worlds and the societies that exist in those particular places. But yes, Burl Herd, which is one of the main societies that we're talking about in these books, call it the Transmundi.
And you do have quite a number of societies, cultures within the story. And you mentioned Burl Herd, which I think is on the blurb as well. Many of them do sort of have their stereotypes, right? Which seems like an oversimplification. And yet, in the real world, we will look at societies in the same way, won't we? We'll say, okay, the US is the sort of capitalist businessman society, right? And I don't know, Europe is like, I don't know, I live over here, but it's like a tourist center or something. But you know what I mean? So is that built into your development of the society? So Burl Herd being, I would label them as the bureaucrats, and then you've got Withered Stem as the scientists. Is it Fermari, the capitalists? That's the one I sort of labeled that way. Anyway, so they each kind of have an identity. Did that evolve naturally out of the discussions and the development of those cultures, or was that sort of baked in from the beginning?
I'll say that I definitely want Cadwell to talk about the origins of all the societies because I think that their initial names is a huge part of that. But I do think we have analogs in the real world in this society that someone could point to, but I do think that we often try to avoid direct analogs. So saying that any one society is like any place on our planet is it's going to have similarities, but it's not going to be a one-to-one in any way. So yeah.
Yeah, I'll jump in and say it started out when we started out in the Bible, there were seven societies and they were all placeholder names. They weren't actual like they were meant to be things that we filled in over time. And each society had like an aspect, and we kind of developed it from there and gave it a lot more complexity and axes of free versus unfree, or like power distribution. I think Ben can talk more about this, like the different axes by which these societies operate. But some of them, like I'll say that Archilumis, for example, was the Society of Scholars to start. And then we gave Archilumis a name, and then we gave Archilumis a bunch of attributes that made it. We tried to do as much as we could to kind of hide that original, like, thing that was on the tin to make it more distinct and more interesting.
Yeah, so I mean, we eventually came up with the idea that, sort of Earth-like analogs of conservative or liberal or sort of authoritarian or libertarian were maybe a little too restricting for the things that we were interested in doing. And so we just thought about different axes that we could conceive of the various societies on. Things like reverence of age versus curiosity of youth, or respect for tradition or interest in progress, or individualism versus communitarianism, sort of rationality, mysticism, thinking about all these different axes that, broadly speaking, we could position the societies on, and then think about characters within those societies. How do they interact with the forces of societal expectation and with the forces of societal and cross-societal interaction? Much of the initial brainstorming that we did was not really about plot, it was about the societies themselves. It was trying to understand the multiverse and what we were eventually going to be writing within. So that ideally, once we started writing, some of those political forces, as they might term it, would do the work for us of showing us the fault lines and the contact zones and the areas where conflict might arise. And then from that, we started thinking about characters and who are the people within the story and how do they align or not align with the societies they find themselves living within.
Yeah, I think part of what I find interesting about these stories is that we've put a lot of effort in the world building, a lot of which doesn't even show up on the page, but it's there in the background so that we do that thing to align so that it feels unified, the voice, even if it's in different localities with different characters and different worlds and different belief systems. So we created these fairly complex societies that are not monolithic and don't have a single worldview. They're much more like real life societies that are complicated and multifaceted and a little bit even sort of self-contradictory. But then we placed characters within those societies and tried very hard to make them like real life people, but none of whom have a complete alignment with the society in which they live, right? I mean, none of us agree 100% with everybody else that we are in society with, and neither do any of our characters. And again, sometimes that doesn't necessarily show up on the page in the actions or the conversations that they're having, but we know as the authors in the background where each character sort of is comfortable within their society and where they have friction and how that makes them interact with each other. And fundamentally, I feel like a lot of our plots really have borne out of those conflicts that happen with the people and with each other and in their societies, and then the societies as they, in those larger groups, interact with each other. And that's sort of really where a lot of our plots come out of, which is, I think, part of how we can have a unified voice, because we all have this understanding of how all of these moving parts work together and then sort of can logic out what that's going to create.
With this sort of broad understanding, do you still develop a favorite culture? I'm just curious. One of them sort of talk to you more than the others, one you'd like to live in or not like to live in?
I'd say yes, definitely. For me. And I think that's true of everybody, right?
Anyone want to share their favorite one, or is that too personal?
I'm not 100% on any of them, to be honest. I tend to like on the page Withered Stem a lot, but I also do like certain aspects of Brill Herd. I don't think I would want to live in Fermare. Like I have definite no's, but not like absolute yeses.
Okay.
But what's troubling about that is because I agree about Fermare, but then I think about Fermare controlled worlds, and so those are some worlds I want to live on. So it's tough because I want Sky Whales, and that's going to be a Fermare world. So that's tough.
You got to take the good with the bad.
Yeah, that's true, isn't it?
Yeah, I find it actually quite annoying that everyone in Darkly would agree that I belong in Burl Herd. There's no doubt whatsoever, but my heart lies in Arkalumas. So that's troubling for me. I would love to just live as a scholar and think deep thoughts or whatever, but I want to organize stuff so badly that I would naturally end up in Burl Herd.
So would you be on the council then?
No, I'd probably be in some council seat, running things in the background and being the
Like
master of
a Duncan or
scheduling and that
something.
kind of thing. Yeah, unfortunately, yes. I think I probably would be a Duncan.
And I'm pretty
Yeah.
sure I'd be Otala, except I would be an Otala that didn't want to travel anywhere, which would be weird. Probably not a very interesting story.
Yeah, probably Withered Stem for me, which I feel like is sort of a basic, maybe uninteresting answer because they at least present themselves and probably conceive of themselves as, more utopian. So it's not a particularly interesting thing, but still think it would be nice.
Yeah, I'm curious with the Withered Stem because I thought there was an interesting idea built into that society, if I understood correctly, kind of the world tree type thing and the discussion of the clipping of it and what would happen if they moved it to a new locale. And I found that quite to be quite interesting. Yeah. You brought up the simulacra earlier, and that was quite interesting for me because obviously it ties into a lot of discussion on simulation theory. That's it's kind of died away a little bit now, but it was bigger a couple years ago. Did your idea of how you built the multiverse come around from that point, or was it based sort of on older, let's say, Gnostic type backgrounds, or where did that enter into it? And I suppose, will you be expanding on that later on? Because a simulacra suggests a creation, for example, which has implications later, bigger implications, shall we say.
You know what's interesting about this? I have no idea how I would answer this question. Like, there's a ton of things that we talk about and we theorize in the Bible that don't make it onto the page about what's actually governing these worlds and that sort of thing. We speculate a lot, and the Bible isn't just a house for things that are facts, it's also where we put our theories. And we don't all agree on our theories, which is quite interesting. We have debates, and I like to write essays about different aspects of the simulacra conversation. I'll say that like the idea I think is like a modal realist idea that like it's the concept that all imagined worlds exist. And so like instead of taking the multiverse angle where worlds are like branching paths from our world, like you make a new choice and it creates a branch universe, it is more that all imagined universes, anything that you could think up or dream up exists somewhere and is somewhere out there that you could travel to theoretically.
One of the mechanisms that's built into your multiverse that's really interesting and also sort of ties in some ways to the sort of hint of religion and or at least spirituality is the way that characters can transport between universes. And that's sort of it's a sort of a soul-like mechanism, isn't it? I wonder if you'd care to someone would care to describe that.
So you're saying that it's spiritual because the consciousness that travels between universes it behaves in the way that a soul would?
Yeah, that's what comes to mind.
Hmm.
So, for example, I've become interested in Gnostic stories recently. One of the things is with Gnostics, you have the afterlife, the various experiences, near-death experiences, etc., like that, which suggests that souls come into bodies and then they go out of bodies, right? And it's very, in some ways, similar to this, in that you can transport between and it also I'm going off on the tangents here, but it also comes into the idea of NPCs, which is kind of a new, well, pejorative, but I don't mean it in a pejorative term. Someone who is not necessarily fully invested in their world because essentially they're just a placeholder moving around, right? So I don't know, maybe you guys could care to expand on that, make sure I've understood it properly as well.
Yeah, I just
There's
want to
like,
say yes, comma, and, but please go ahead.
yeah, comma and indeed. Yeah, we talk actually a lot about that kind of aspect of the stories in book three. It's sort of proxy stuff. So when people travel in our stories, their consciousness, the essence of who they are, leaves the body that they were in and enters a new body in the new locality that has been immediately created for them by the entity that is governing all of this stuff. And that person that they have now becomes edited into the memories of everyone around them. So they have always been there, but they are also brand new. And the question about what happens to the body that they have vacated is an open one that we talk about a little bit in book three, but that is extremely interesting to all of us and is one of those things that Cadwell alluded to, that we do not all agree on exactly what we believe is happening there, but that's part of what makes it interesting, because just like you were saying, Edwin, about that spiritual question of like, what is the essence of a person and what happens to you if you're not there anymore, is one of the things that we think about a lot and choose to not answer definitively in these books, because it's, I think, more interesting to leave it an open question for us and for readers to ponder what that is actually the person that is traveling.
Loomis to talk about too.
Mm-hmm.
Forever.
I would
Talk
say
about forever.
this is the greatest debate, I think, so far. And we don't agree on what's going on, but we do agree that we want to keep it open and speculative. And so characters do speak on it with authority, right? Some characters or some societies have beliefs about what proxies are, or for example, but other people, sometimes within those same societies, have other theories. And I think that that is really interesting and it's kind of, mirroring our own reality, like questions that we can't answer, but we speculate about constantly and forever.
So you have certain people who can do the transporting between the realms, and they have an interesting mechanism, which is various sensory experiences like singing or eating things. How did this sort of idea come about? What was the sort of process of developing that one?
I think that was present from the very beginning, from the very initial conception of many worlds, that this was how travelers moved between universes with a particular traveler mechanism, whether that be something that allows them to move other people or other people to them. I think that was part of the germ itself.
Yeah, it was in Cadwell in your original document, I think, that you sent out. But that was the thing that first, I think, popped for me, is the idea that sometimes people aren't in control of that mechanism. That's really what fascinated me. The idea that not only is there a mechanism people can use to travel between universes, but that some people don't even have control of that or don't even know that it's happening to them. And that electrified me.
Yeah, it was in the original idea, but I think we've over time developed lots of interesting very different traveler mechanisms. And that's part of the fun too. How random can they be? How specific can they be? How upsetting or dangerous can they be? I feel like sometimes we have traveler mechanisms that we don't explain, but the origin for how they might have discovered that mechanism is heartbreaking if you think about it. And so it's one of those things where we don't really have a ton of time to explore everyone's origin for traveling, like what was their first travel like, but sometimes through their mechanism you can see like, oh yeah, that would have been, terrible potentially.
Yeah, it made me think you do have some interesting mechanisms without getting into too much specifics of some of the more interesting ones later on. But for example, singing a song or something like that. And yeah, it just makes me think, wow, this would be a really chaotic multiverse, wouldn't it? In terms of when people discover this and then you accidentally travel to another realm, another world without knowing what's going on. It is, like you say, I think it'd be very frightening and heartbreaking, wouldn't it? How many different mechanisms have you come up with, or is it pretty much everything's on the table?
Yeah, I mean, we've had a lot. I will say that we have had to, I feel like it's literally anything is possible, but we have had calibration moments before where we've decided that something is tonally off with the scene or with the character or with the moment in the book. So there's considerations. Obviously, we don't just, throw something crazy at the wall and say, yeah, call that a travel mechanism. But I do think that pretty much anything is possible.
And we have also discussed things that would, potentially be universe contingent, like flicking a light switch. If you happen to travel into a universe where there are no light switches, well, you're stuck there.
Okay. Yeah.
Mhm.
So one that come to my mind, I'm just throwing it out there. I don't know if you have it or not, is someone who travels in their dreams. Is that something that sounds interesting? So you fall
Yeah,
asleep and that triggers your travel and you end up waking up in a different world, basically,
yeah,
not knowing
it's
whether
interesting
you're
you
awake
mentioned
or
that.
dreaming.
The short story that I wrote that's in the Many Worlds anthology, that is the person's travel mechanism. They dream a different life, and they both of them, both versions of that person in each universe believes that their dream life is in fact just a dream. The story is about them coming to realize that they are in fact the same person traveling between these two locations. And I think that's super interesting. I'm fascinated by the similarities between dreams and memories and how can you tell which thing is real and or not. And that's where that story came from. So, yep.
I love that story too. It's what we would call like an anomalous traveler. We have like all our breakdowns and definitions for things, but yeah, that's one of my favorites. It's really cool
Yeah.
concept.
One thing you do get into sort of, I think, when you start discussing the consequences to the individuals of the traveling, the characters do start bringing up the idea that they're not sure that they're staying the same. Now, I like this idea because I use it in some of my own stories as well. But the idea that when they transport to another world, they're not 100% certain how much of their experience is due to the new body they're in versus the mind they brought with them. So first of all, I guess, is that going to be discussed more? And you said you didn't really want to go in to the mechanism and come down firm on a particular mechanism or nature of this, but is this going to be developed more within this series, this kind of personal uncertainty?
Yes, we intend to explore that. And I think that like in the same way that travel mechanism is infinite, the way that people experience traveling is infinite as well. Like some people have a stronger sense of that like self-sickness is the way that we've talked about it. And some people don't, or their idea of it is very different. I think that we are quite excited about exploring the nuances of that from person to person.
Yeah, I was just going to say also, what you mentioned about we call it meshing, but you go into a locality and the locality starts to infect the consciousness. And then when you leave that locality, how much of that do you take with you? And then how much of that informs the next locality and the next proxy body that you enter? All of those are considerations I know that I'm thinking about, and I think we're all thinking about.
Yeah, no, that's a very interesting part of the story for me as well. I wanted to just briefly touch on something. I mean, we talked about there's the spy aspects and the sort of the personal stories involved here as well, but there's also a lot of political machinations going on within the story. And we do have the notion of, let's say, the corruption of absolute power. And so I guess each system is going to have each realm, each culture is going to have its political system. We focus largely on Burl Herd for this one, which is a very bureaucratic system. I guess I'm looking at a more general question here, and so not specifically due to your story, but political systems do create abuses of power, and we are used to growing up in a democratic system. But do you think there's other systems that are more effective? And do you explore any of these, or will you be exploring any of these in your stories?
I will say that I think that we all have probably different answers to that question, and that's probably part of the interesting dynamic of this universe and of this trilogy for sure, is because this we certainly butted heads in the creation of the societies about what would and wouldn't work and which sort of governance in a given locality is going to be successful and which one isn't. I think we all have very different opinions on that, and that bears out with the characters on the page, and that's hopefully what we've tried to keep interesting and real, is that there's not really going to be one perfect answer to anything.
Yeah, I think generally our answer is that all of these different systems, which operate very differently, they work, but they work in the sense that like our societies and our systems work, right? Like they work, but there's
But
always something that is,
imperfectly.
yeah, but imperfectly. And there's actually like really passionate people within all of these systems that are trying to make it more perfect in its way, right? And so yeah, no, we're very deeply invested. We have tons of conversations about what changes from society to society and how do societies change over time themselves.
It was
Yeah,
very
and I think
important for us in creating all of these societies not to produce one that was wholly villainous and not to produce any characters that are wholly villainous. So Burl Herd is unquestionably an authoritarian society, but the people within it and the people who are powerful within it believe that it is an effective mechanism and social structure to produce the greatest amount of good for the greatest amount of people. I don't think many of us writing would necessarily align with their beliefs in terms of how their society distributes power and how it governs. But there are people within Burl Herd who have a great deal of belief in that, and it was important for us to allow those people to make their case for why Burl Herd makes sense.
Yeah, and I think
Yeah.
we really tried, as sort of both Cadwell and Ben were saying, we tried to do that with all the societies, is think about how a society that functions the way that they do could try to do so in a way that is benevolent from the standpoint of their belief systems. I'm thinking of Fermari because the closest thing to sort of a bad guy society that we have is Fermari. But even then, within the context of Fermari, they're very family oriented, and everything revolves around the family and family relationships and what is best for the family and being communitarian in that way. And so I think one of the things that we try to do is make sure that when you take the standpoint of the belief system of the people, the majority of the people who live in that society, what would they think doing the right thing would look like? And then try to work from that perspective. I find it very interesting to look at conflicts from where people are both trying to do the right thing, but coming at it from a different perspective, as opposed to someone who's just sort of twirling their mustache and trying to take over the world. That's sort of what we've tried to do, is approach each society from the perspective of a true believer within that society, and then posit like, okay, how could we best create that situation that we want to see come about?
And I will say we've used that to make the societies more complex on the page too. Like, I mean, when you start to do that and interrogate some of these things, you find some holes and some problems that you hadn't thought about. And so you shore up those problems in the system that you've set about, and hopefully it creates a much more interesting social fabric, I think.
Yeah, I think it's great that you guys do have the five heads that can come together to discuss this stuff, because I think inherently as authors and humans, we have a limitation perhaps in our understanding of reality as well, and our approach to things. And one thing that I've been wrestling with myself in regards to political systems, like, because we tend to go with, oh, is this the best system? Is this the best system? Is this the best system? And you guys are, like you say, pulling holes in it. Okay, this one's good for this. This one's good for this. Something that I'm wondering about is certain systems better than other systems at different scales and at different times in the development of society, so that an ideal society would potentially be flexible in its political structure, which is a highly complex situation. But I don't know if that's something you're interested in exploring at all as well. It's not a usual take on the things, but
Have you been hacking into our files and reading book 3?
so maybe you are exploring it then.
Yeah,
The
we
short
are.
answer is no, I'm not hacking anything.
Yeah,
Well, I mean, it would be
that's the
impressive
best
because we actually
reply.
haven't written that part yet.
Yeah, maybe I'm getting
You're
pressed. I'm
we
tapping into the
confident.
simulacrum here, and I'm trying. So
Yes,
you are
very
exploring. That's really cool. Yeah.
very much so. We are interested in the different shortcomings of different ideologies and different structures at various scales and points within their history, thinking about, rather than a system to end all systems, a system that could potentially encompass all systems via its flexibility. What might that look like? Potentially, is such a thing even possible? So yes, we are curious always about exploring that sort of question.
That's very interesting. I look forward to that book then. Anyone else want to add anything to that? Or
I'm afraid to add anything.
okay.
I don't want to say anything. That's a spoiler for
I
things.
was already like, spoilers.
Fair
Stop
enough.
talking.
So
We're
how
very much interested in like the specific societies that we've created and what the answers to those societies would be. Like
right.
someone, who's dissatisfied from each of those societies, what would they try to imagine? I'll just stop. I'll stop.
Yeah, fair enough. So how big do you plan your series to be? Are you just going to sort of keep going until you guys get tired of it, or do you have a sort of set path in mind?
Yeah, this is 3 books. It's a trilogy. What's going to happen after that? I mean, we do short stories on the website that, all the story worlds there, all connected to the multiverse, Transmundi. So, we're going to keep doing that. We're going to keep creating in this universe. But what it looks like after the trilogy, we are not ready to say.
What I will say is that this is a very small segment of time within the many worlds chronology. There are a great many other significant moments in the history of these societies that we are interested in exploring. And, some of them we've planned, some of them we've conceived of, some of them are still just sort of an abstraction. But there are many other stories that we hope to tell within the simulacrum, both before and after this particular trilogy.
I'm just curious, your Many Worlds Collective, is it open to new authors joining it? Do you have a process for that, or is it sort of limited to the 22?
We do have a process. It's very like collectivist. Like we have a system and some voting and stuff like that. We do invite people. The thing that we've been doing right now that's been taking up most of our time is the books. And so one of the things that we are very much looking forward to, and there will be, I hope, more novels in the future of different kinds. We're hoping to put some of that energy back into growing the collective and collective engagement and all of this stuff that's a part of the everyday operations of the group, things that we want to return more energy to.
Right. I guess you could, in theory, use another Many Worlds anthology as a application process almost, couldn't you?
Well, we have
Yeah.
talked about doing that. Yeah. So that is something that we've talked about.
And could you see, like, if the collective, that's 22, you say right now, even that's a pretty strong size. And if it grew further, could you see, like, so Darkly Lem writing this segment of this series of stories, and another segment of the group writing their own set of novels as well?
Yeah, that's
the dream.
Yep.
Excellent.
You've
So
once again
franchising
been
it out.
reading our minds.
I'm
This
gonna have
is
to
like the
test
only
myself.
thing we
No.
agree on. But yeah, that is the dream.
Excellent. We are getting close to the end. I wanted to go with, I don't know if it's a big question. It's hard to say sometimes because we're talking about the multiverse here. But I'll go with my final set of questions, and then we'll give you a chance to plug some of your stuff. So you hint at a multiverse. It seems to be a structure convergent between, well, in my interpretation, between, let's say, physics, modern physics, and maybe ancient spirituality. And this is the simulacrum. That's my interpretation, at least. As you said, you're not settled on any particular interpretation. What I was wondering is, if this suddenly turned out to be true, was proven to be true, what consequences would you see for modern society? How would people react to this, do you think?
What a good concept for a story.
Yeah.
I think they'd freak out and then go back to normal immediately.
like everything else, right?
Yeah.
I don't know. I think it would be kind of like the internet, like bigger than the internet. Like it would change society, but there would be a new, like, I think Ben is suggesting a new normal, right? There will be a normal that will be returned to. It just would look different than what was before.
it'd probably be tourism immediately.
Yeah, I was thinking about the transporters. It might also challenge certain psychotherapy interpretations because you could imagine that some of those people may have actually transported instead
Yeah.
of being mentally ill, for example.
Yeah, I think given the way that we've created the simulacrum and the particular limitations on travel, I think it would be one of those things that could easily go underground for a very long time. One of the reasons that we created the societies that we did for these books is so that we could imagine what it would be like after that big transition period where everybody discovers that this is real and that you can do it. But given that like when you leave, you don't necessarily have a way to get back. There's no proof, there's no tangible thing that you can bring to come back and say I really went to a different world, except for your story that you did that. And the next person who goes may not go to the same place you went to necessarily. I think it's one of those things that could easily not be sort of proven or believed for a very, very long time. And in
Yeah,
fact, it might be the way the world works now, and we just don't know.
Yeah, so I was just saying it could be all these near-death experiences are actually transporting to different worlds in the multiverse.
yeah, or depending
Mhm.
on how many people have the same story, it could just be looked at as a cult until there's enough people that it's not a cult.
Yeah,
Yeah.
interesting. So if
Also, it would
no, go
depend
ahead.
on like who discovers our world. Like if we're talking about this world specifically, like if Bro Hurt discovered our world, it would be very different than if Mare. I
Yeah.
would bet if it does exist already, it's Mare.
I was going to say,
That's my theory.
we're already living Fleisch world.
That's more or less the capitalist society, is it not? If I'm remembering. Yeah,
Crime
interesting.
capitalism.
Yeah, a version of it anyway.
That
Uh,
was redundant.
so you have a simulacrum, as we mentioned, that kind of suggests a creator. Maybe not necessarily, but it's a simulation of something. That historically, there's versions of, let's say, religions, spiritual interpretations, etc., that suggest either benevolent or malevolent creators. So you say Christianity would favor a benevolent creator, but you get to the Gnostics, for example, believe that this is a simulation created from a perfect world. This is an imperfect simulation created by a demon. So obviously a malevolent creator. Do you have any thoughts on that? Any position you favor when looking at the world?
I think of the simulacrum, if we're going to use the word creator, which I'm going to put the caveat on there that that was something that you did that we did not do,
Sure.
I would call it a curious creator. And so benevolence and malevolence don't enter into it whatsoever. It's curious.
Yeah, I think we've said explicitly that we don't know what the motivations are behind something, even if it did exist as a creator. But if you could suppose anything, it would just be whether something was interesting or not.
Yeah. So the opposite of like indifference, but not necessarily a caring interest, you know?
Right.
Yeah.
It could be accidentally malevolent then, coming from a science background, that could describe a certain number of scientists for sure.
For sure.
The
So-
other great debate.
Yes.
Well, we've sometimes characterized the simulacrum as a storytelling force. So the being interested, being curious, the chief engine that sort of exists within the simulacra and within the many worlds is our interest in story. And so that is sort of the motivator for everything that derives from the simulacrum. Is it going to be an interesting story? Is it going to produce
Right.
storytelling engagement?
I was just thinking, you guys probably have some really interesting conversations. Have you ever thought to live stream every once in a while?
We
We
have.
talk about it all the time and then just never do it.
Yeah.
After the books, we might do something like this. We do have really interesting conversations.
Yeah, that'd be interesting to listen to, definitely. So I think we are about out of time, but it has been great chatting with you. Before you go, perhaps you could let us know when the upcoming book is coming out again. Just remind us if you have any sort of plans on timeline for the third book. Also, any personal projects you guys have coming out, let us know. And if you're going to be at any events and where to find you online. Don't also.
Okay. I don't currently have anything coming out, but I am working on selling a book. So hopefully at some point I'll have something to talk about, but not right now. I guess I have at Warrior Tales on X, but I don't really go on there. So I don't think I have any socials. So that's why I figure I should go first because I really don't have much.
Yeah, in terms of finding me online, you can't. That is wholly by design. In terms of things to plug, I will just point to manyworldsforum.com. There are some delightful stories on there, some of them by me. And I'll say the ones by me, as well as some of the other ones, are very much engaged with the many worlds meta narrative. So if anyone is interested in learning more about traveling in the societies and any of the sort of broader epistemological questions that might be raised by the simulacra and traveling and the project overall, maybe go check out those stories.
I'll go next. What do I have coming up next? I have a book coming out in June of next year called The Department of What It Really Means to Be Human from Gold SF. And it is a near future sort of applied science fictional story set in my hometown of Te Whanganui-a-Tara, Wellington, New Zealand. Set in a world where it's a bit of a post-capitalist, post-climate change society. So there's universal basic income and people are living in a slightly different manner than they do now. I do a lot of positing about how we could change this city in particular, but the world in general to be a bit more egalitarian. And also there's a detective story that's going on in the background. So that's coming out next year. You can find me at darusha.ca, both on the internet in general and on Blue Sky. And I'll also point people to darklylem.com, where there's a fine band photo of the five of us if you're curious to see what we all look like.
I'll jump in and recommend once again that, check out manyworldsforum.com for the really cool stuff that we've been doing on the website. We have a few seasons of stories that are pretty great, and we do audio for those as well. I have a book that just came out. It's the third in a trilogy called A Ruin Great and Free. It came out last month. And I have a collection that I'm working on that should be coming out next year. My socials are all Cadwell Turnbull, at Cadwell Turnbull. And my website is cadwellturnbull.com.
And you mentioned you have socials for Darkly Lem, but you haven't done anything with them yet.
They have a bit of content on there. We forget to update them is our problem. But Darkly is darklylem.com on Blue Sky as well.
So Darkly Lem, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for
Thank
having
you
us.
very much.
Thank you.
And thank you for listening. Information and links related to this and all episodes are available at alternatefutures.co.uk. I'm also over at Substack under Alternate Futures, where I post articles on science fiction, socio-technological issues, and futurism. You can subscribe for free or sign up for a paid account if you'd like to support the podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, why not share it with friends, writers, and other sci-fi fans you know? And if there are any indie sci-fi creators you'd like to see featured, send me a message at podcast@alternatefutures.co.uk. Once again, I'd like to thank you for listening, and I hope you'll join me on the next episode.
This is the future. Human error. Evolution. This is the future.